established by Mark Chen. So we really begin on time. All right. 我们现在就开始，非常准时。这个很好的这个先例是早上陈唐山这个委员所建立的啊。那我先简单介绍一下我们这个下午的这个小组的一个程序本来我们有2位印度的讲者，但是呢，今天这个只有1位。那么这个另外他没有来的那一位，他有他的论文，那我会这个简单的把他的这个重点来这个描述，然后呢，我们请这个再请我们的印度的专家做他的这个论文的发表，然后我们有2位这个评论人。So I just explain the procedure we're going to have. That we have 2 Indian speakers, but one of them is unable to come, and so I would briefly summarize his main point, and then we would ask you to present your paper. And 我们这一位印度的讲者，他是 Commodore Uday Bhaskar， 就是这个印度海军的这个准将他在海军工作很多年，到几年前才退休。那么他在退休以前，他曾经在印度的国防部这一个智库叫做 IDSA 这样的一个机构工作，所以对跟台湾互相之间有很多互动。他以前也来过台湾，那么因为他在 IDSA 当这个主管所以嘛，这个对台湾的事情当然知道的很多。那么我们因为有他，所以呢，过去民进党执政的时候呢，这个印度的这个国安部门跟台湾的国安部门有很多互动，就是因为他的贡献。那么他现在呢，这个负责印度有一个海事的基金会，未来这个台湾跟印度方面的这些合作还会继续这个牵连到他那么因为过去我们这个论坛安保协会办过好几次的这会议，但是这一次有印度这正式参加今天罗福全理事长也谈到说，这个未来我们要跟这些民主国家连线来形成，所以有印度这个来参与当然很重要。但是呢，我相信在台湾一般大概对这个印度的情况是不太了解。今天在座这2位都是研究印度的这种专家那么我先这个介绍一下这个我们如何了解印度的所谓东望政策跟它的外交政策的这个一些这个议题一些重点印度从这个冷战结束之后，1991年，差不多20年前有重大的内政跟外交的转变。内政方面呢，他们放弃 Fabian Society 惠宾社的一些社会主义的原则，计划经济这些都放弃了。我想，这个英国的柴契尔夫人执政的期间，自由化、民营化应该对印度有某种程度的影响。那么，印度这种这个内政的这种改变，那么让外资能够来投资，开放市场经济，对印度国力的成长有很大的帮助。在外交方面呢，印度放弃了过去所谓不结盟政策，那么跟美国加强这个经济还有国安方面的合作。那 么这个他们的所宣布的所谓东望政策 （Look East Policy） 啊，这个加强跟日本、东南亚国家的这种关系。当然，这个背景就是因为中国的崛起。那么，印度有一个时间也曾经想跟台湾有更密切的经济合作，但是世纪交臂了啊。那个时候，李登辉总统啊，有各种其他的考虑，没有跟他们啊进一步的合作。但是呢，1995年台印之间呢建立了这个代表处，所以从那个时候呢，我们有更多的这个互动，这是一个很重要的一个发展哦。那么这个印度方面呢，他放弃了这个不结盟政策，跟美国日本这个其他国家加强合作，当然很重要的一个考虑就是中国印度方面，他的所谓威胁评估，谁是敌人，谁是朋友，这样的一个评估是这样。国内呢，有所谓这个圣战恐怖主义，最主要就是有巴基斯坦这个来操作，那么对印度常常发动攻击。比如说，公元2000年，在印度的国会，这些暴力分子、恐怖分子发生这个发起一些这个动作，影响很大，跟这个美国的2001-911呢这个相似了，但是没有死去那么多的人。还有2-3年前吧，这个恐怖分子在蒙贝这个一个旅馆，几个旅馆这些观光旅社，外国人住的地方，这些恐怖分子发动攻击，死了很多人。那么那些恐怖分子有的抓到了，有的跑回巴基斯坦。所以呢，如果说讲印度的这种威胁的评估，敌人是巴基斯坦。那么他们之间还有这个喀什米尔这种领土的这种争执那么另外，当然他们最大的这个担心就是中国那么中国到现在为止，除了过去他们1962年有这个中印战争之外呢，现在呢，中国还继续想尽各种办法来骚扰这个印度那么帮助的巴基斯坦制造核子武器，还有这个飞弹。那么在印度洋这个有缅甸孟加拉、斯里兰卡巴基斯坦都有中国的港口，他们这所谓这个 Chain of Pearl 珍珠项链这个中国想办法来包围印度这是这个印度评估的这个他们的这个敌对的势力对他们的威胁。当然，这个印度的国防部长在4年前嘛，他跟印度的军方讲说：“我们应该把中国当作最大的威胁，然后我们的整个军事的部署也应该这样子，不要太过分担心巴基斯坦，毕竟巴基斯坦比较弱。那么跟印度打过3场的战争都被印度打败，但是呢，这个对印度的军方来讲，巴基斯坦还是非常危险的一个国家。但是呢，印度国内包括他们的国安团队对说，巴基斯坦是比较可怕的威胁呢，或是中国有一些争论，但是他们的国防部长说，把中国当作最大的这种威胁所以嘛，这个因为这些问题这个所以印度这几年来，当然这个对于他的所谓东望政策呢，跟美国、日本还有这个其他国家的合作，都是这个把中国当成这个最大的这种威胁那么我们也看到说，这个印度非常的这个努力，在这个东望政策里边呢，那么跟日本的合作的关系很好。那么韩国在印度很多投资，那么他们也希望台湾到那边投资。 这个印度这几年来一直讲到说，他愿意跟台湾有这个 FTA 自由贸易协定，马政府不敢或是不要，因为他怕中国这个批评他，所以他对印度这种好意到现在为止没有真正能够这个回应。这是我们希望说未来台湾新的政府，比如说民进党恢复执政的时候，我们应该可以大有作为。那么我们看到说，这个印度最近这个它国造的航空母舰 Vikrant 这个刚刚下水，8月12号下水。那么国造的是他自己做的，中国的这个航空母舰是买的，从外国买的，但是印度这努力来加强它的国防。这个核子武器也好，飞弹也好，因为的确说，他也把这个中国的威胁非常认真的看待。那么中国这个对印度他用尽各种办法要来离间分化印度跟美国、印度跟日本、印度跟其他国家的关系。他一方面帮助巴基斯坦来骚扰威胁印度，但一方面呢，他笑脸的外交这个来讨好印度。现在呢，这个我讲到说，这个中国就多管齐下了除了国安方面对印度的威胁之外呢，它有这个经济的外交。现在印度已经变成中国已经变成印度的最大的贸易伙伴，所以呢，这个印度跟中国之间这种经济的关系也非常重要。另外呢，这个中国现在因为跟印度关系这样密切，所以它在印度的国内影响力慢慢这个加强。我是说，这个中国在印度国内实行统战的策略，就像这个中国在台湾实行统战一样。那么这个争取企业界、媒体、学术界，甚至于政党，印度有共产党，有左派的政党，所以中共呢跟他们这个关系很好，用他们要来影响印度的政治。这一些这个都是我们要注意到说，理解到说印度的这种关系。I just briefly talk about your perception and your relationship with India, your Look East policy. 现在呢，这个我就这个简单的把这个印度的另外一位学者他的这个论点把它这个 sum up 这一位这个 Dr. Sanjay Baru 他是这个现在的这个伦敦的这个战略国际研究院的这个负责关于地缘经济跟策略的负责人那么他还曾经这个是他们印度总理的顾问因为他突然有事情，所以不能来呀。不过他已经有他的这个 paper 这个包括翻译都在这个这个我们这本书里边那么他这一篇这个论文里边有谈到这个中国习近平上来之后，他对印度有过5个原则，但是呢这个原则里边的第5点 ，Fifth Principle initiated by 习近平，他这样说这个要双方互相尊重对方的所谓核心利益，但是呢，巴鲁博士说这一点非常不公平，因为呢，这个中国到现在都已经侵犯了印度的这个核心利益，比如说对这个巴基斯坦。这一点就是很清楚，而且呢，这个中国还有其他方面对于这印度这种威胁，这个都是不符合这个所谓这个尊重核心利益。那么他自己也讲到这个印度本身 对中国也有5个原则。这个5个原则呢，是说这个双方这个应该互相尊重这个对方的这些利益了哈。那么这特别是他们疆界到现在有这个领土的争端，但常常这个中国会侵犯印度的这个疆界。今年4月间这个中国的军队曾经就这个越境在那边这盖一些营地来表示说，这是我们这个中国的。那么因为这一点，所以印度当时采取很强硬的手段，说如果你们这些营地不撤销，你们中国的军队不撤回，那么李克强总理，中国的新的总理，第一次出国访问就是要到印度，你就不要来。他们曾经有这样很强硬的这种手段，所以后来这个中方就让步了。那么李克强到印度访问，5月初的时候，他展开笑脸的外交特别这个谈到这个双方的贸易什么各方面。但是这个我们注意到说，印度很强硬的这种态度。过去呢，这个比如说印度的总理跟中国的这个领导人，比如说温家宝，2010年去访问的时候，印度在这个公报里边还谈到说西藏是中国的领土。这一次他就不讲了，这一次这个印度没有讲，所以我们注意到这个印度对外关系的人都觉得说，的确说这一次印度非常敢那么这几个这个原则，另外第2个原则就讲到说，世界很大，所以嘛可以容纳印度跟中国同时并齐，他们之间不必有这种零和游戏的竞争讲到这一点，说这个双方都在崛起那么当然这个中国对印度的崛起也非常的这个担心所以想尽各种办法要来干扰，要来这个防止这个印度的这种这个崛起，所以印度才有这样的一个原则说这个双方世界有够大了，所以嘛这个他们都可以一起崛起，而且这个崛起呢可以对全世界特别是新兴国家都有帮助这是第3点。第4点谈到说2国之间会有合作，也会有竞争，这是很自然的事情。希望这个竞争这个能够以这种善意的方式来进行不必说是零和游戏。最后一点，这个很重要，第5点那5个这个原则呢，是说这个尊重对方的这种国家安全。那么这个不愿意看到说这个中国方面只是嘴讲，但是呢实际行动这个并不如此。而且他提到说，整个亚洲，印度跟中国的这种合作，以及他们对其他国家的态度很要紧。这个印度对于中国，比如说跟日本的争端，在南中国海所采取的强硬的态度，他觉得印度方面觉得说这不符合亚太和平的这样的一个原则，所以印度这个有这样的5个原则。那么我相信呢，这个我们几位这个都会这个5个原则会继续来提。Now I would ask our speaker, Commodore Bhaskar, to present his paper, please.
Thank you, Dr. Paris Chung. Can you hear me? Can I leave this here? Good afternoon, everybody. At the outset, I'd like to thank Dr. Fu Chen-lo, the president of the Taiwan National Security Institute, and also recognize Minister Morimoto and his colleagues from Japan. And Mr. Yates, Mr. Steve Yates, as most of you are aware, not only is he a friend of Taiwan, but he's soon to be the senator from Idaho. So. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, for me personally, as some of you are aware, it's always a great privilege and I feel very happy to come back to Taipei. I had occasion to be here and make my first visit under the able, I would say, stewardship of Dr. Paris when I was in the IDSA. And each time, as I said, I learn more about what is happening here in Taiwan, what is happening in the region, and a very, I think, valuable perspective that one does not often get in other parts of the world. So I'm delighted to be back and share my thoughts. And let me continue with, I think, this very rich discussion we've had in the morning in the first two panels. My brief was to speak about the rise of China and the new situation, and deliberately, if you see the way in which we phrase the English title, the new situation in the Indian Ocean and the new situation that will be engendered by the rise of China, which is off the Indian Ocean. So I deliberately chose both. And my synopsis is there. I may make a slight departure. I'll request Dr. Paris to perhaps fill in those blanks. Because as I was speaking this morning to our American colleague, our Japanese minister, and a few of you, it just struck me that I made my first visit to Japan in 1991. I was telling the minister that. And at that time, we were discussing some of the geopolitical possibilities. And one thing which at that consultation between Japan and India, it was very new for Japan, we were discussing a China 2 or 3 years after Tiananmen, 2 years, 89. And as you know, in India, we have our own perception and assessment about Beijing. And in terms of the significant possibilities in the maritime domain, I distinctly remember we were wondering as to whether and when China would be able to enter the Indian Ocean. At that time, it was considered to be a tectonic maritime development for a variety of geopolitical reasons that all of you are aware. So my first proposition is that now, it's almost 22 years since that discussion, and I have periodically had occasion to speak to our Japanese colleagues on this subject, depending on the politics of Japan and how they look at other parts of Asia. I have come here to Taiwan, Taipei in the past, and some of your colleagues have visited us, and we have discussed the same subject, the Indian Ocean and China. And my first proposition is that one of the most significant maritime developments that has taken place in recent years is the presence of the Chinese Navy, the PLA Navy, in the Indian Ocean, ostensibly for anti-piracy. All of you are familiar with the piracy story. It peaks in 2007. 2008 onwards, you find most navies that have the capacity have sent their warships. And for the PLA Navy, for China, I have argued in other places that this was a very, very valuable opportunity, which they have frankly seized with considerable, I would say, determination. And from then to now, as a sailor, as most of you are aware, I'm a retired naval person. One of the most significant geopolitical and naval developments is the presence of the Chinese Navy today in the Indian Ocean. That is an empirical fact. They've been there. They now have access to a few ports along the littoral of the Indian Ocean, and they have maintained a presence. Now, if you try to contextualize this event, this development, I make the following case that for any major power, there are only 3 navigable oceans in the world: the Pacific, the Atlantic, and the Indian. And if you trace maritime history over the last 500 years, from the time Portugal and Spain started what you might call as the colonial period, great powers have had a compulsion to maintain a presence, quote unquote, in 2 of the 3 navigable oceans. I mean, that is a tenet of maritime and naval strategy, if you will. So I make the submission that if you look at China and its geography, actually China is in a maritime bind. Whatever other people may say outside, I'll say as a sailor, and I'll be happy to be corrected, that if you look at the geography of China and the Western Pacific, China is under enormous maritime/naval constraints. I mean, if you just imagine the geography, I don't have the map here, but China is boxed where it is because of the geopolitics, the American presence, Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, and as you go down. And if you look at the individual naval capacities of these countries, starting with the US, Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, and I'm not talking about ASEAN just now, the Chinese Navy would find it very difficult, actually. It's not an enabling geography or not an enabling geopolitics. So what does China do? Now, of late, repeatedly, whenever you go to any presentation on China and maritime, naval, Indian Ocean, the opening slide is the Malacca dilemma. It is ascribed to then President Hu Jintao, 2003, and the suggestion that China has a very deep anxiety about the Malacca dependence. As again, all of you are aware, in 1993, China became an importer of oil, having been a net exporter of oil from 1949, independent PRC, to 1993. And progressively, the dependence on hydrocarbons at sea increases. But, and I don't have, as I said, there's no time to get into this in the paper, but I make the case that actually China does have a maritime/naval cognizance, an awareness. And I go back to March 1949, that very famous speech by Mao Zedong, when he talks about the need for China to invest in its air force and its navy. The army is already there, the PLA. And therefore, even today, March 23rd, if you remember, is the Founders' Day of the PLA. That was the day when the speech was made. And I have, in the past, tracked some of these political articulations going back to Chairman Mao's time. And you will find references to the need for China to reclaim a certain naval maritime profile. They talk about the Chinese admirals of the 14th and 15th century, the eunuch admiral, Zheng He, and so on and so forth. But there is a history, there is this narrative of the Chinese maritime capability. And my formulation is that because the Pacific presents the kind of constraints that it does, there is a certain compelling logic as to why China will look at the Indian Ocean, because it has no locus as far as the Atlantic is concerned. And if you look at the way in which China has moved, frankly, I would say from 1993 onwards, apart from the politics, meaning that there is a very clear political articulation, there is a gradual professional movement. And again, I make the case that this is more discernible after Tiananmen, and particularly post-Cold War. And I would say that at the higher political level, it is the Deng Xiaoping era, when China becomes more aware and acquires a discrete capability. So what has this done in terms of the ocean? When I say that China's presence has led to what you might call as a new situation in the Indian Ocean. The new situation in the Indian Ocean, starting from 2008, is that till recently, meaning prior to the arrival of the Chinese Navy, it was an ocean that had a certain status quo, which is that the United States, as the most capable navy in the world, had a presence that stretches really from ASEAN all the way up to the east coast of Africa. It has certain presence as far as the Persian Gulf is concerned. And it has operational units, aircraft carrier groups, etc., that are differently moving using Deja Garcia as the equivalent of a permanent aircraft carrier. The Indian Navy, India, is the most credible navy in that part of the ocean. Geography enables India. And there was what I would describe as a status quo. I make the submission that with the entry of China and the PLA Navy, there is first of all what you might call as a change in the operational grid, in the operational profile. Chinese surface units are there, and over the last year to 18 months, I know that we in the Indian Navy have picked up enough signals to say that Chinese underwater platforms, meaning submarines, have also entered the Indian Ocean. I am sure that every major navy must be monitoring it in its own way. So the first, as I said, inference that you can draw from what I have outlined is that the operational and strategic texture of the Indian Ocean has changed. Now, which leads us to the second part of my argument or my formulation. What does this do? What are the implications? Okay, China is there, so are the Americans, so are the Indians, and if you recall, France as a European Union power has a presence also in Réunion. And so there are other navies. And this is perhaps indicative of the fact that the Indian Ocean is now becoming strategically more relevant than it was in the past. And here again, I want to make a broad maritime point, if I may, which I'm sure the scholars who follow maritime and naval issues will recognize, like my discussants here, that in 500 years, global maritime focus has shifted from ocean to ocean, meaning that in the first part, 16th, 17th century, the colonial experience was driven by European powers, Iberia first, and then it goes to Britain. And the contestation is in the Atlantic and in the Indian Ocean. I mean, there is a whole rich history to be studied about France and England at sea. That if France had won one critical battle in the Indian Ocean, maybe the history of colonialism may have been different, but that's another point. So you find that the global focus shifts from Atlantic, Indian, and progressively by the time the baton passes from Britain to the United States, you see the emergence of the Pacific, and throughout the 20th century, you might say that the global focus is on the Atlantic-Pacific combined, particularly in the Cold War, when again, the sailors here, the maritime experts will recognize there was a certain salience to what used to be called in the submarine arm as the GI-UK, Greenland, Iceland, UK gap, and what that meant in terms of naval strategy. This was in the Cold War. The Indian Ocean was a relatively dormant ocean. It was, you might say, relatively unnoticed, neglected. It acquires greater strategic salience, I would say, briefly, when the Shah of Iran is overthrown and the United States redraws, its own priorities, etc. But there is no challenger at that time. So the status quo comes back because the former Soviet Union did not have interest in that part of the world till Afghanistan. But the naval maritime component is not of great relevance. It is after 9/11, that's the case I make, that the Indian Ocean gradually acquires greater strategic relevance. And you see after the end of the Cold War, from Atlantic-Pacific, for some time it becomes only Pacific-Pacific. If you remember the early years after the end of the Cold War, Clinton won. It seemed as if the whole world was focused only on Asia-Pacific. And the focus was Pacific-Pacific maritime-wise. After 9/11, it gradually becomes Pacific-Indian Ocean. And now, in this year as we speak, from 2012 to 2014, because of the US presence in Iraq, Afghanistan, and other possibilities in Syria, one could make a case that very briefly, we are looking at Indian, that all the major powers, for a variety of reasons, have their stakes in the Indian Ocean, and China is one of them. And what this does, and this is the second part of my argument, I am saying that China's interest in the Indian Ocean is more than 20 years old. It is, to me, post-Tiananmen. From the time China becomes a net importer of oil, Malacca dilemma, what does China do? I think, and this is my reading, that China has made a very prudent and a very astute plan, which is that they have invested politically, economically, in certain key countries of the Indian Ocean littoral. The first is Pakistan. Again, that's an old history, so I don't want to go too much into that, except to say that it's a very relevant point. China and Pakistan have a cooperation in weapons of mass destruction, that is nuclear weapons and missiles. And Pakistan has a very curious kind of, shall we say, status, whereby it's a strategic ally of China. It is also a strategic partner of the United States. And this goes back to the 1979 Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, for various reasons. But for China, now the access to Gwadar, if those of you who remember the geography, Gwadar is a port west of Karachi. It literally straddles the Persian Gulf. And from there, if you come down, China has made investment in Pakistan. China has made an investment in Sri Lanka. The name of the port is Hambantota. China has an investment in Bangladesh. The name of the port there is Chittagong. China has an investment in Myanmar. And like this, there is today what you might call as a very clear plan. And I'm not using the phrase string of pearls because that is not in the Chinese lexicon. It is not in the Indian lexicon. It has been used by some analyst and it just stays. But to me, the implication is that China has a game plan. And in an earlier paper that I did in 1993 or 94, I tried to suggest that China is looking at the Indian Ocean in a very focused way for strategic reasons, and that energy is only one of them. Today, piracy has given them the opening to be there tactically. But I have made one small reference in my synopsis, if it's there up on the slide. I have said this paper argues that the really game-changing initiative by China would be if it can change its political geography a la Wegener, so as to acquire an abiding presence in the Indian Ocean. Let me elaborate on this. I don't know how many of you are aware of this German maritime strategist. His name is Wegener. He is a German admiral of World War II fame. Most people who study naval and maritime issues are familiar with Mahan, the great American naval strategist. They may be familiar with Corbett. And there is a whole Mahanian thesis. There is a Corbett's nuanced understanding of naval power about why you have to have the naval or the maritime element influencing events on land. I mean, that is the core of the Corbett argument. But the forgotten strategist I often feel is Wegener. And I don't want to go into the detail of Wegener in the interest of time, except to make one statement. You know, to me, what is the core of Wegener in today's discussion? Wegener makes a point, and he says this to Germany. It's unfortunate, I mean, from the German point of view, it's unfortunate that Hitler does not pay attention to him. Otherwise, the war at sea could have been different. Wegener's point is that if you are constrained by geography, you should use politics to trump geography. Meaning that different countries have different geographical advantages or constraints in the maritime domain. I made the case that China is constrained in the Pacific because of geography and geopolitics. If you use the Wegener formulation, how can China access the Indian Ocean? The only way, I mean, short of saying that you will create a road rail link from one part of China towards Kunming and then come into the Bay of Bengal, which is not possible, it is to use politics. So, if you can make investments in the littoral, as I said, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Myanmar is one example. The other is to do what the Americans did. The Americans acquired Deja Garcia, the island. It's a small speck in the Indian Ocean from the British. And, you know, the original inhabitants are still going to the UN for redress. That's a different matter. But the Americans are there in that base. It has changed their profile in the Indian Ocean. America is a resident power. France is a resident power because of Réunion. I am saying that if China follows the same logic, and today you look at China's investment in the Indian Ocean islands. In Maldives, those of you who are familiar with developments in South Asia, we have the SAARC countries, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, etc., South Asian countries. The last summit of SAARC was held in Malé, in Maldives. And the day of the summit, the day before the summit, China opened its embassy in Maldives. I mean, if you can think of political signaling, there could be nothing more, shall we say, emphatic. So I am making, as an analyst, I am making the case that China is making what you might call as an investment that could be interpreted in the Wagnerian mode. That if you are able to get political support, say from the Maldives or from Seychelles or any of the other islands, there is a whole, by the way, China has a Pacific island strategy, but I'm not getting into that just now. I'm just sticking with the Indian Ocean. I make the case in my paper that this would be the real game changer. And it is in this context I have said that islands like the Maldives acquire critical significance, not only for China and for India, but for all of us. You know, every country that is represented in this room today. And what China does with its capacity, that to me is the real concern. I made reference to why is India concerned about China. I think in Dr. Baru's paper, the last phrase is the strategic mistrust between India and China. To me, that is the abiding feature of the Sino-Indian relationship. We may have trade. Our trade is now $100 billion. But so do China and Japan. They have even greater trade. So do China and United States. So do China and Taiwan. So robust trade is no indicator of what happens in the strategic and the security domain. So this strategic mistrust, the reason is, what does China do with its capacity? Since I don't have time, I won't go into the details, but I'll just make this again proposition, maybe we can discuss it later. China cannot be trusted from my Indian perspective, one Indian's perspective, because it does not take its power with responsibility and integrity. There is a certain duplicity about China and its use of its capability, where there is a public rhetorical statement and the actions are contrary. Now, this links up with what I would call as weapons of mass destruction, and what we in India feel is a very deep anxiety that China is actually using its nuclear weapons through Pakistan to support terrorism. We were recipients in Mumbai in 2008. Today, the United States is at the receiving end. And I think one of the greatest ironies is that the United States has given Pakistan some $26 billion maybe aid. And the same money is being used to attack US troops. I mean, there can't be a greater irony, but that is something the US and Pakistan have to deal. For us, the concern is that when you get this power, what do you do with it? When you get this naval maritime presence in the ocean, what do you do with it? I make the case that China is adopting or following what you might call as a very subtle revisionist agenda. Again, I won't go into the details in the constraints of time. If I have one more minute, Paris? If I could just take another minute. I had planned to finish at 2:10 by that watch. You know, what does this all mean? I have made this case that both the South China Sea, and that's there in my synopsis, and the Indian Ocean islands, from the Chinese perspective, are representative of constraining and expanding the maritime geography of the Pacific and the Indian Oceans from a very well thought out Chinese perspective. Major powers, and they're all here, United States, Japan, Taiwan, India, should be cognizant of the long-term implications of this development. And this to me is quote unquote the new situation that is gradually crystallizing in the Indian Ocean. And the last point is, okay, if this is the nature of the domain, as I see it, one man's view, what should we do? And we know, sitting here in Taipei, that there are some political, shall we say, constraints again as far as Taiwan is concerned. In similar fashion, there is a limit to what US Taiwan can do. There is a limit to what Japan Taiwan can do. There is a limit to what India Taiwan can do. But I have argued this in the past, and I'm making this case again, and I was talking to Paris about this in the lunch break, that there are some areas where Taiwan can cooperate, which is not necessarily against the current conventional thinking about what is it that Taiwan can do and cannot do. Now, I remember reading about the WHO and Taiwan's own status there as an independent actor and its contribution. I am saying that in the maritime domain, while any form of naval exercise may lead to a lot of, shall we say, political problems that countries may not be able to face or deal with just now, there is a whole, I would say, space under the umbrella of science and technology and oceanography and humanitarian assistance, disaster relief, which I am saying, I've said this in Japan almost 20 years ago, but as I said, Japanese politics at that time was not quite receptive or conducive. But I am proposing again for the consideration of this audience that some selective bilaterals, Taiwan-Japan, US-Taiwan, US-Taiwan-Japan, on oceanography, on S&T, including pollution, oceanic health of the ocean. And this could then be brought into the Indian Ocean because it has a very clear linkage with human security. So I thought I would just leave that as a thought and see whether some of this could be pursued. On that note, thank you very much. Thank you for your...
Thank you. I'll just briefly
since I mean...
interpret. 这 Commando 这个准将哈，他讲到说，印度的新的情势，印度洋新的情势，最主要就是2008年，中国以这个打击这个海盗为名，中国的海军就进入印度洋，进到这个非洲，非洲沿岸那边有这些海盗，那么他就用这样的名义，那么就进入了这个印度洋。现在这个不只是这些对付这个海盗的这个中国海军，甚至于中国的潜水艇也到印度洋来了，不只是说这个军事力量之外，他现在在印度洋里边想办法要取得一些岛屿做它的基地。美国这个利欧加西亚本来是英国的这个一块岛，现在变成美国很重要的一个海军基地。那么现在中国呢，这个想这个用的巴蒂夫这个巴尔的夫一块岛小国家，用各种经济政治的力量，希望能够介入这个地区，把它变成中国的基地。这是这个中国方面在印度洋新的这个情势，他已经这个认为说印度洋对中国来讲是一个很重要的一个活动的区域。那么他最后讲到说，台湾跟印度也可能合作的一个领域，就说这个在台湾在南中国海、太平岛这个的确台湾在那边有最大的一个岛，那么希望透过台湾跟其他国家，美国、日本对于这个科技方面的合作 ，oceanography 这个海洋的这个研究，那么使得说这个台湾能够扮演更重要的这种角色。那么他也提到说，这个将来从南中国海这种合作还可以跨进到印度洋。那么以后我们会再谈说将来台印之间还有什么样的一个领域我们可以来合作。下面following ask Professor 赖宜中currently is the Deputy President CEO of Taiwan Trust， 现在是这个除了教授之外，他也是台湾智库的副执行长。我们请这个赖宜中先生。
哦，真多谢吼。我想因为今仔日吼，我所写的物件，既然大家会当看是用这个汉文来写、汉字来写的吼，所以我等下可能我就用英文哦，这个所在来做一个发表，因为我是嘛希望讲这个物件嘛会当互咱伫印度吼、美国也是讲包括日本这的这个 distinguished 这 gentlemen 吼，会当来甲因搁较交换意见。哦，当然我等下所讲的甲这个我所写的有一点仔无共，因为听到拄仔前几位吼所讲的物件，搁有想到新的，底下搁有想到新的这个灵感吼，所以可能会一点点不一样，但不会差太多。好 ，So I really appreciate for Commodore Bhaska's great comment, particularly about the changing status quo in the Indian Ocean. Of course, going back to the issue about the rise of China, I think probably we are not seeing the rising China, but the starting of decline of China. Because when we're going to see all the economic indicators, as well as its political capacity, and also all the social disintegration, the phenomena started to come out, that this China, compared with like 4 or 5 years ago, is actually definitely a weaker China rather than a stronger China. But the problem is that a China that has already been beefing up with all those weaponry and other political dictatorship mechanism, and when it is declined, how would react to this declination? And also, how you perceive the outsiders' reaction to its behavior. That's going to pose a great uncertainty. And of course, with Chinese dictatorship political regime itself, that probably we're going to see a less confident China, very paranoid about everything, and started to see everything as a threat to its national security, and started to expand what it calls a core interest to everything else. So in the past, we saw that in the 1995-1996, even with the Taiwan Strait crisis, the Chinese definition about core interest is about Tibet, is about Xinjiang. But then after year 2000, or even after years 2005, year 2006, and particularly after the Bush and the Wen Jiabao's meeting year 2003, the Chinese expansion about core interest started to include Taiwan. And in year 2010, the Chinese Foreign Ministry made a statement that the East Sea and the East China Sea and South China Sea, or East Sea and South Sea, that's China's close interest. So that basically is a pattern that the expansion of the core interest itself has something to do with how China is perceiving the outside, as well as how it is reacting to the outside as the country that is losing its confidence about itself. Then the question is, when China, this uncertain nation, is casting with all kinds of the ability it can have, although and causing all the uncertainty about the region itself. And the problem about Taiwan definitely is going to be how to cope with China, and particularly for the sustainability of Taiwan itself. Would there be other alternative other than China, or other alternative when the United States, as we saw from all those comments in the morning, that the uncertain U.S. commitment to the Asia-Pacific, that is to Taiwan now, how we're going to react to that. And from this, I believe that if we take a longer view about the economic and the whole, the world geopolitical center of gravity, the shift, the shifting trend that they probably will observe, if we sort of borrow what the Commodore Bhaska said earlier, of course, from year probably 5th century all the way to 15th century, even to the 17th century, the Indian Ocean has been, due to the great monsoon, that the force of nature is carrying the great weight. So the Indian Ocean has been the busiest trade route around the world. And that has carried great weight for the East-West cultural as well as trade communication. But then this route has started to give way to the rise of the Western European and the colonial powers rise. And gradually, of course, in the 20th century, we saw the world geopolitical center is centered around the both sides of the Atlantic Ocean. So basically, that is Atlantic century dominate the first half of the 20th century. And then with the United States surely surpassing everything else, and the rise of the Pacific states, and later in the last half of the 20th century, we started to see that the center of gravity shift from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean. And then to the Pacific Ocean, first from Japan, and then the four dragons, including Taiwan, then the four tigers in the Southeast Asia, and then finally reside in China. So basically, if you saw the development of the Pacific century, I have to say that China probably is the last one on the train. And last one on the train basically means that probably the end of the Pacific century or the decline of the Pacific century could come out. But with that, we also started to see that the new center of gravity picking up right here in the Indian Ocean. Indian Ocean is not just about India. Indian Ocean, we saw a new development and cooperation pattern that emerged around this area, where the oil dollars from this Middle East and the natural resources from the East Africa, from Kenya, from Tanzania, and of course from the Indonesia. And we have some preliminary ensemble at the Indonesia, and the financial management, the leveraging from the Singapore that provided it, and Bangalore from India provided software in managing all those transactions. And of course, they reproduce things, either sell within the Indian Ocean, the India and the Southeast Asia, the new emerging middle class, and also through the Middle East or through its past colonial connection to the European, also east to the United States. So this is a new pattern that started to emerge in the Indian Ocean. And if you also look at the demographic, when the world look at the demographic composition, then one of the advantages that China in the past was able to enjoy is about its big population. And the big population provides a vast amount of the labors. But then we also see that China, due to the one-child policy, this country probably will get old before it gets rich. But right now, the 75 over to 80% of the population under 30s is centered around the pan-Indian Ocean ring countries. We have India, we have Vietnam, we have, well, thanks for, it's an irony to the civil war within the Cambodia, also in Cambodia, or even Indonesia. This is the area where the cheap, well, I'm not going to say cheap labor, but the young laborers, the bountiful of the labor supply, that is concentrated deeply in this region. Another thing is about the population. This is the population that amassed at least 1/3 of the world populations. If you look at the population of the whole world, European probably has, including the Eastern European country, has about 600 million people. And the North America has about probably 400 million people. And South America is a little bit less. But then, other than China, the population around the Asia, we have the center of gravity in the Northeast Asia, and then it's in South Asia plus Southeast Asia. So basically, it's the Indian Ocean ring. So this is my argument, that I think for Taiwan to develop further, and it's trying to find out the real alternative other than China, and also knowing that the United States is commitment to this region, and also its economic uncertainty, that the third way for Taiwan, we really need to look at Indian Ocean. And Japan already paid great interest to the Indian Ocean. I think when the Prime Minister Abe, before he became the Prime Minister, he visited Taiwan in the year 2011. And also when the reporter asked Abe, at that time he was not the Prime Minister, about the we know that in year 2011, the Taiwan and Japan has signed the investment agreement. And some people in Taiwan like to suggest that the reason for Japan to sign an investment agreement with Taiwan is because Japan can through Taiwan to go to China. Because Japan itself has a problem with China, okay? But Abe said that no, the investment agreement actually increased the Japan-Taiwan opportunity to cooperate, to invest in India. That's what he said, okay? So the issue is that even Japan, the country that Taiwan had been looked up to, also focused, particularly from this Prime Minister Abe, that about the potential in the Indian Ocean. First India, and then of course, Japan has long cultivated its relationship with Southeast Asia countries, including Thailand, Indonesia, Vietnam, and recently Philippines. So that is the issue that we should notice. And China, of course, also noticed this. And if we remember that the new Chinese president, Xi Jinping, the first country, of course, he visited is Russia. But the first the cross-country visit he paid is to where? East Africa, Tanzania, Kenya. And then, of course, he went over to the Western Africa countries. One of the reasons he visited there is because China has great investment in East Africa. Why in East Africa? It's not just about South Africa and the BRICS. It is about East Africa, the kind of resources they can provide to China. And East Africa, look at the past history. From the 5th century all the way to 15th, 16th century. The East Africa, the people from East Africa has been providing the great navigation skill for the trans-Indian Ocean to be able to integrate it as economic whole. And probably right now, they are discovering these new possibilities. And China noticed that. How could Taiwan just ignore this too? So basically my argument is that for Taiwan, if you're really, really serious about sustaining Taiwan itself, instead of just charging the administration that this is a sell Taiwan out government, of course I believe that he is, but we need to find the alternative. And the issue, when the United States has this kind of wavering commitment, or at least we are not certain about what the content of U.S. pivot toward Asia is, another alternative we should focus on and spend our political as well as strategic investment should be the country in the Indian Ocean, and particularly India. And for that, I have to say that there are several sorry things that happened. First of all, India is the country officially, publicly, said that they are willing to sign FTA agreement, or at least they are willing to open an FTA discussion with Taiwan. But what happened to Taiwan government, the administration, but also what happened to the opposition's response to this? And actually, we do not have a very adequate response and enough attention to this. Second, this is another very sorry episode. India is Minister of the Human Resources, equivalent to our education ministers. And when he hosts Taiwan's education minister visit to India, I think that's in year 2011, he proposed that why don't Taiwan just send out 10,000 Chinese language teachers to India to teach Indian people learn Chinese? Because India really need to pay attention and focus on the research and quality about what China is thinking. And my dear friends here, he can witness, he can make a testimony. How many teachers we're sending out to India right now? 7, if I don't remember wrong. Of course, probably the number is a little bit higher. 10,000, they're asking 10,000, we're sending 7. And that's providing the opportunity for a lot of employed Taiwan's smart young people. You can travel to India, and then you can increase your connection with India, the future, the economic gravity of the whole world, and at least gain some livelihood along this way. And not to mention that you can cultivate the political as well as strategic elite along this process. But this is what we have. And our education minister right now even start to cut the budget for some university in Taiwan is willing to send a teacher to India to teach Chinese, they cut budget about those university. So what happened here? Okay? And I think those sorry episodes is really, really damaging the prospect that about Taiwan's sustainability, because it is not just about Taiwan, India. It is about Taiwan, whether we are really serious looking at our future. And India is just one example. So I'll just end out here. Thank you.
Thank you, Yi Zhong. Next, we would ask Professor Chen Mumin to make his presentation. Chen Mumin, in the past several years, have visited India many times for his research project. So he knows the situation in India quite well, and also he has some idea as to what Taiwan and India can cooperate. Mumin.
Yeah, thank you. My pleasure to be here. The topic of this session is about China rising, is about Indian Ocean, and earlier Commando Bhaskar and Dr. Lai, they made great presentations, on both topics. Now I want to talk about this issue from a different perspective. Since I wrote a paper in English, and my PowerPoint slide is also in English, so the following presentation I will speak in Mandarin Chinese. Okay. 我用中文讲哈，因为我的 paper 刚好是用英文写的啊，这个也是用英文这样，这样很国际化哈，国际化。来 ，OK， 下一张，这个如果说10年前、15年前研究国际关系的学者就问他说，这个世界上哪一个地区重要，哪一些议题重要，没有人会讲印度洋，为什么？再回想一下，以前都在讲这个东亚地区、亚洲太平洋地区10年前刚好都是反恐美国的反恐战争但是在最近几年这个印度洋基本上已经变成所有国际关系学者在关注下一个国际政治发展的焦点为什么？原因非常简单，因为在印度洋地区，我们发现了一个在过去1个世纪以来国际政治从来没有出现的现象。什么现象？有2个国家同时崛起。第一个国家我们不用讲，就是中国 ，China Rising。OK， 第一个国家就是印度。这个国际政治很少有看到2个在地理上邻近的强权同时崛起，它会对于未来的国际政治发生什么样的影响？我觉得这是未来我们要思索的问题。下一章。所以我在这几年我自己的研究里面我花了比较多的心思在研究中印关系或是印中关系所以说我认为说要去了解中印崛起对这个国际局势的影响，就要先看中印关系。中印关系到底是什么样的状态这个事实上有蛮多的书各位有兴趣可以稍微看一下。这是比较有名的一本2003年一个美国学者 John Garver 他写的他认为中印关系就是一个一直延续下来的一种竞争跟对抗而且呢它本质上就是冲突的。也就是说中印从1960年代到现在一直都是处于冲突而竞争的状态为什么？原因很简单，因为他们在地理上面、在战略上面、在地缘上面这个有很多的这个利益冲突。下一章。好，但是其实也有很多的学者说中印其实可以合作啦这种中印合作的书你们都会看到有一个叫做钦迪亚的说法，就是中印合作、中印大同这样的书在2007年就出了2本，可见前几年很流行。可是这几年比较没有在讲，为什么？很简单，下一章。下一章，因为其实现在大部分的学者在看中印关系的时候，会发现说2个国家经济都在发展，2个国家也有可能合作，可是它本质上是竞争的。为什么？领土问题没有办法解决然后2个国家都在崛起的国家，它一定在外交上面在军事上面它会有企图心嘛所以像这个2009年这个 Mohammed Malik 他这个学者所写的这样的一本书他也是从中印在冲突的角度来看中印关系。下一章。西方的学界就是说美国的学界他们在看中印关系的时候，他看得更广一点点他也有讲，他们不是只是看中印之间的这种纯粹军事或领土的冲突，他会看说有没有合作 事实上是有的哈，就是说这个中印之间他们在某些领域上是会合作的，像环境议题啦哈，贸易，它有的领域是会合作，但是哈这个中印这2个国家，它的领导人跟他的政治精英在看对方的态度是不一样哈。中国不会把印度直接当成是一个敌人，但是呢，印度在看中国很不一样，他即使不把中国当敌人，又会把中国当成是一个对印度这个国家安全一个非常重要的一个挑战者，a challenger to India's national security。下一章，好，这是另外一本今年出来的书哈。这样的书呢，其实也认为说中国印度是有竞争有合作哈，但是它的本质上还是彼此之间它是处于一个这个竞争的关系，而不可能会完全合作。好，这是一个学术上的一个讨论哈。下一章好，所以说我现在接下来我再花一点点时间，讲说，那它到底竞争跟合作到底在竞争合作什么东西哈？合作我们不要讲了哈，就是说它在国际场域里面这个在我刚刚讲说，在一些像这个就是像贸易啦、环境的议题，它会有一些合作。可是我们如果把中印关系它把它拉到一个区域的一个 regional level 的话，这个无疑这个在区域的这个层次来讲，一定是竞争一定是 competition 那中印的竞争在主要有几个地方2个地方一个地方是哪里？就是喜马拉雅山就是因为这个领土的冲突，1966年打了一仗，到现在为止过了50年领土问题没有办法解决，所以中印的本质这双方在这个边界都部署重兵第二个中印会在哪里竞争？就是今天这场的主题，就是印度洋。印度洋就是说变成未来中印之间它在竞争的一个场域这个是我们现在所看到的这个另外一个趋势。下一章，这个刚刚这个 Commando Bhaskar 有提到了这个字珍珠链战这个 String Approach Strategy 这个他说印度跟中国都不讲，这是美国人讲的，没有错，这个词是美国人发明的但是我发现其实中国的学者跟中国自己的专家现在也在讲珍珠链，也在讲这个大陆的学者像胡志勇这个还有这个就是上海的复旦大学的教授，他们都开始讲这个东西所以我觉得这个中国也不用再隐藏就是说他事实上是真的就把整个印度洋地区当成是他未来这个发展成这个下一章这里就是这个就是珍珠链 ，This is a String Approach Strategy. You can look at the map 这就是珍珠链战略。他想办法在印度洋沿线就是这个对这些国家进行基础设施的援建。他最后的目的是什么？我想很清楚绝对不是只是说保持航运畅通而已的。他事实上是有这个把他的这个军事跟战略的这个影响力扩张到印度洋的这个企图心这个是这几年我们基本上大家都认同中国现在正在这样做好，那所以现在我其实有没有一个很明确的结论但我我就告诉大家说这是正在发生的事情，台湾怎么办那我最后其实下一章我在想说台湾怎么办就是说其实我在印度我去了印度10次我跟印度的学者谈印度的学者他们跟我讲的话是这样子的，他们觉得说2000这个08年之后，因为台湾跟中国的关系改善所以说中国大概就不需要花太多的军事力量来对付台湾，他现在就拿来对付印度这样这个对这个他们也认为说这是另外一个印度就是他们的一些说法啦，就是说这个如果说是这个就是说台湾对印度很重要，可以跟中国做，可以说是因为现在印度跟中国的贸易量很大但是印度很怕中国的经济侵略，所以他们希望跟台湾这个就是这个增强贸易的联系，这样可以就是降低对中国市场的依赖。所以台湾对印度的重要性有两重，一重是它可以在本质上改变中印战略的这种军事的对峙的状态。第二个是说台湾本身在经济上面可以变成印度去移转它海外市场的一个替代方案但是很可惜下一章最后一章但我很可惜我发现其实无论是台湾跟印度大家都说两边都说对方很重要，印度说台湾很重要，台湾也说印度很重要，事实上都没有做任何事情，很少做这个跟我们现在政府的态度有关系 这个就是说台湾事实上很少有一个很实际的，就是说除了那种就是说一些表面的这种合作互访之外，没有很实质的合作。台湾没有很重视印度，我必须这么说。那印度呢？我觉得印度它有做一些事情在2010年中国总理温家宝去这个访问印度的时候，跟印度签了一个这个就是这个叫做这个 memorandum 就是在印度的外交部第一次说台湾跟西藏都不是中国的一部分，这是。就是说他都不讲，以前会讲，以前说台湾是中国的一部分，金马龙没被讲，好像说台湾跟西藏，他没有说是中国的一部分所以代表他印度的外交政策在转变所以我认为这个我认为说台湾应该要抓住这个跟印度合作的机会，那未来这几年是一个关键，大概这是我的这个报告，谢谢。
谢谢陈牧民教授，这个我们几乎每1分钟都用了，还超过5分钟。不过呢，这个的确刚刚大家出一些很好的意见。那么究竟说台湾跟印度如何加强合作，我们下一场还会谈到。我们理事长会来这个主持下一场，我们会讨论到这个台湾跟这个印度跟美国跟日本具体应该怎么合作，只说不练是不行的，我们要想到怎么做。谢谢各位 ，Thank you， 潘老师。